Okay, so now we have our pistol equipping part, but currently, as you can see, like if I switch to rifle, then it goes to unarmed mode. Plus, whatever I picked at the initial stage, it's not currently updating its own anim's set state, right? For example, by default now I'm equipping the pistol, but the character is still remain at the unarmed mode, right? So if only if I switch the weapons, the anim sets are updating, right? So today we are going to fix this issue and improve our weapon class structure further. Okay, right. So in order to get started, I think maybe we can quickly look into our weapon system and maybe our weapon base and our character base. So I can close rest of the tabs that have been opened, so it will be a bit clean. Okay, so in character base, actually I'm picking the weapon, or like equipping the weapon whenever this weapon system is being initialized, right? Which means at the beginning play of this weapon system, right? So whenever this one calls initialize, it will simply instantiate all the weapon classes that I populated at the default weapons, and then it will pick whatever the weapon that I choose at the default weapon slot, right? So whenever this one equip the weapon, it will call this function to equip the new weapon and unequip the previous weapon, right? So I think the issue is actually at this thing, because at the beginning play we don't have a previous weapon, right? We simply have our new weapon. Okay, so in order to address that issue, actually first we must have a better class structure for our weapon bases, because currently we have these test weapons inside our weapon blueprint directory, right? So I just added this stuff just for the initial testings of the weapon system, but I think since now we have certain level of implementation at our component structure, we don't need to have these test weapons, right? Instead, let's create the actual weapon classes that we require and add these to character base, right? If I go to character base, actually not the character base, I should go to player base, right? And inside the player base at the weapon system, I will remove these two instances, and then I can safely delete these two classes. Okay, so now we only have our weapon base. So by using this weapon base class, I'm going to implement firearm weapons, right? For example, firearm weapons could be pistol, rifle, shotgun, sniper rifles, things like that. So I'll create a new folder called firearms, and there I'll create a blueprint class, and as the parent class I will use weapon base. I'll call it as BP firearm weapon base, right? So this is basically inherited from BP weapon base, And by using this firearm weapon base, let's initialize two different child classes or child blueprint classes for pistol and weapon separately. Right? So we can actually share the firearm specific logics at our firearm weapon base class. Right? So I'll create a new child blueprint class called BP pistol, and I'll duplicate it and create a new class called BP rifle. And I can move this outside, actually not the outside, instead I will create a folder inside firearms called base, and I'll move the firearm weapon base class to that directory. Right, now if I open BP pistol, I can see it's inherited from BP firearm weapon base, and similarly for BP rifle, it's inherited from firearm weapon base. Right, so that's the first category that we need for weapon blueprint classes. And the second class is basically melee weapons, right? For example, like sword or knife or even unarmed state can be categorized into this melee category, right? So there also I will go and create a new blueprint class, and the class should be inherited from BP weapon base, and I can call it as BP melee weapon base. Right, and then I can create a child instance for BP unarmed, right? Because unarmed state, or by default unarmed and set state, will be considered as a melee weapon, and I can duplicate it and I'll call it as BP sword. Okay, then I can move both into, no, I can create a new directory for base, and I'll move the weapon melee weapon base to inside that directory like we did before. Okay, so if I open the BP unarmed, now you can see it inherited from BP weapon BP melee weapon base, and if you go inside the melee weapon base implementation, it inherited from BP weapon base, right? Okay, so this actually comes with object oriented concepts. It's known as actually inheritance, right? So basically, like, since if we have this sort of inheritance, we can easily share the common functionalities in between classes instead of redefine it again and again, right? So let's say in case if we need to have a different functionality at our child instances, then we can simply override the existing functions at the parent level. So we have like a much more better modularity and extensibility for our classes, right? Then now we can actually sort of configure our weapons, right? So I'll start with firearm pistol, and here you can see by default all the configurations are there, right? So as the name, I will give this one as pistol, and as an icon, I think I have icon for that, T pistol, and I will use a skeletal mesh for the pistol as well. So simply search for SK pistol and attach it to it, and as the attached socket, I don't remember what's the socket that I've used. Let me quickly open the skeletal And yeah, we need to use this pistol socket. And as the anim set, it should be pistol, I guess. So let's go to our data table and look at it. Yeah, it should be pistol. Okay. And then I'm not going to configure rifle yet, because later on I will configure rifle specifically in a later episode. But for now, let's go and configure unarmed state, right? Okay, so as the unarmed state, the name should be actually unarmed. So I'll copy the raw name in here. And for the icon, actually, I have one for unarmed. Yeah, so T unarmed is there. And we don't need to actually implement any sort of static measures or skeletal measures, because by default, this is just a default pose that the character inherits. So no weapons will be held. And no need to implement a specific attach socket, because we are not going to instantiate any sort of instances to be attached to the character skeleton. But as the anim set, make sure to keep it as unarmed, right? So that the anim set will be initialized at the weapon initialization process. Right. So let's first start with these two. We have pistol and we have unarmed, right? So now let's go to our BP character base instance and BPC weapon system. So by default, all the characters will inherit unarmed anim set state, right? Because currently, if you look at the locomotion system, we have the anim set name configured as unarmed. So by default, the weapon that any character is holding should be ideally the BP unarmed, right? Later on, actually, we can configure whatever the default weapon that character is holding, but at least each character should have PP unarmed weapon at its default weapon category, because it's a default pose, right? So I'll add BP unarmed inside our weapon system at BP character base, and the default weapon slot is 0. Compile and save. Now if I go to the player base weapon system, here you can see by default we have inherited that specific instance here as well, right? And maybe at the player level I can configure the second weapon, right? For example, let's say the second weapon could be the BP pistol, right? Compile and save. And if I go back to character base, you can see we don't have that pistol instance here, right? Because inheritance always work for the downstream, right? All the logics and the instantiations will pass to the downstream, right? Not upstream, right? So if you specify specific function, or if you modify any sort of a variable at your child instance, it doesn't affect at your parent class, right? That's why actually we don't have that instance here, right? Okay, now by default I think the character should spawn with the unarmed state, and then I can switch to the pistol, right? So let's play test. Okay, now you can see by default character is not holding any sort of weapon, right? Instead he is simply remaining at the unarmed state. Okay, and if I press for pistol, then only character switch to that specific state. right? But I think the pistol socket is sort of incorrect, right? So let's go to mesh skeleton and let's attach escape pistol to here. I'll use pistol idle ADS. Pause the thing. Right. Let's add pistol SM. Okay, so this is the issue actually. So the root location for our SM pistol and SK pistol is different, right? So that's why we have sort of a offset for our skeletal mesh. But anyway, since I'm going to use skeletal meshes from this position onward, I will make the socket location aligns with skeletal meshes. Okay, then this would be fine. Let's play test again. Okay, great. Right. Okay. So now we can switch to pistol and switch to unarmed state as well. But still, I think I can further improve this because currently I'm switching the weapon at the player base by simply calling its index, right? So if I press 1, it calls the 0th index, which means it goes to unarmed state, and if I press 2, it goes to second slot, which is pistol. But this is just for testing. Later on actually we can further improve our weapon switching mechanism. But yeah, so currently we have this implementation working properly, right? Okay, great. So now we have the pistol set up properly, and in the next tutorial let's see how we can integrate the rifle for our character. I'll see you there. Thank you.